To love a place is not enough. We must find ways to heal it. Robin Wall Kimmerer. Climate on our planet is changing faster than our systems can respond. Our temperatures and unnatural disasters are treated as environmental problems instead of human ones. But what if climate wasn't something to manage or to survive? What if it was a relationship we were responsible for stewarding? This is What If, where we imagine a world as it could be and meet the people building it now. I'm Daydriane, and I'm glad you're here. Today we're asking, what if our climate was in harmony with itself again? And what does it take to make this what if real? Today we're joined by Cheyenne Kippenberger, the Policy and Advocacy Futurist in Residence at Common Future. She's a member of the Seminole Tribe of Florida and Chilean American, and the founder and CEO of CK Tribal Consulting. Cheyenne has spent nearly a decade speaking and advocating for Indigenous communities through works centered on mental wellness, civic engagement, and environmental protection. Cheyenne, I've read your bio, but if someone just met you for the first time, how would you introduce yourself and tell them what you do?
Probably start with my name. Cheyenne's my English name, but my given traditional name is Ethet. And in English, that means fire. That was given to me by my maternal grandmother. I would definitely, stress the fact that I'm a citizen of the Seminole tribe. I'm Chilena Americana. That's a huge part of my identity and who I am. I would say that I was raised on my reservation in Hollywood, Florida. I still live there today. I love where I come from. I love my community. I love the cultures that I was raised within. I've indirectly found this really beautiful way of giving my life and career to that. So I love what I get to do.
Perfect. And so do I. So starting with your work, everything in your work comes back to your relationship with land. So let's start there. What does harmony with the earth feel like to you and in your homelands?
Being a part of my tribe, it's really been ingrained into me since I was a little girl that our identity is so closely intertwined with the land that we come from. And it's mirrored and reflected in all parts of our culture, from our language, our dances and songs that we do out at our ceremony even, and in our arts and crafts. Like, all of the things that we create with our hands are with materials from the lands, but then the actual arts that we make and the crafts that we make also mirror different things from the land as well. And so when I think about what that harmony looks like in my own life, especially, I think it is just really this recognition of that we're all a part of it, like this larger balance, this larger picture, even if that's how you want to kind of put it into visually, is that we are each a part of it and we have a responsibility to it inherently. I mean, even so much so to the point that you can say that the health and well-being of people is a direct mirror of the health and well-being of the environment.
Yeah.
And so harmony, I think, just looks like a balance of reciprocity, of exchange, and definitely a big acknowledgement of where we as people, as human beings, fall into that balance as well, and the responsibility that we have.
Yeah. And it's also kind of a nod to the indigenous wisdom of speaking of the earth as a relative or a living relative as kin and not possession or something that you have ownership over. How does that, I guess, framing shape the way that you understand your relationship with the land?
I had a really beautiful upbringing. My reservation's right smack in the middle of the city. So we're right in between Fort Lauderdale and Miami. I mean, growing up, the area that I was in was somewhat of a cow town. Like, I remember them building a Target in my area. I remember, things that started getting developed, like townhouses, homes, shopping plazas and stuff. But, in that, I also had this really unique upbringing of also going out into the glades and the woods, and we played outside and we swam in the canals and we would go hunting and riding around. And I just loved being outside when I was a kid with my siblings and my cousins. And, I watched my grandma and my aunties cook on the fire the way that our people always have. And, it was so communal and so ingrained in the culture, you know what I mean? And I always understood it to be something that we enjoyed right now, but it was also important to make sure that it was maintained for future generations to enjoy it as well. And it's a little sad kind of thinking about that idea specifically. I have a little brother who's 16, and his entire upbringing and the things that he saw around us is completely different from what I saw when I was a kid. And, like the canals that we used to swim in, like there's this one specific area on the Brighton Reservation we used to play at. We can't go in that water anymore because it's polluted.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things and animals even that I saw growing up that aren't there anymore.
Mm.
And so, it's the wisdom that you referred to is really this understanding that our time here is temporary, and in that temporary time that we're here, we need to do our part to take care of what takes care of us and what provides our literal food, our water, sustenance, housing, etc. To not only take care of it, but to try and even leave it in a better state than when we had it for
Yeah.
future generations. And so the idea of ownership of land, like commodification of natural resources, has never been a way of life for our people. And, the idea of ownership over land, I mean, in itself is kind of insane. It's like you can't take it with you. You
Yeah.
can't, it's just for right now. And so I don't know. I almost feel a sadness for people that the land and the world and animals and plants and water in that way, rather than understanding it to be relatives of ours. Like everything has life. Plants are living beings. The water in itself is a being. And everybody deserves to enjoy the environment. Everybody should be able to enjoy, recreational activities outside. Everybody should have access to green space. Everybody should have the right to a relationship with the land.
Yeah.
When you kind of are forced into these lifestyles that we've been forced into, where we're living in the city and, we're surrounded by concrete buildings and we're on the roads and asphalt and things like that every day, it has really severed people's relationship with the land. Once that is, once that wedge is created between us and like these other things, it's hard to reconnect in that way. And, people used to know where their food came from. People used to know where their
Yeah.
milk came from. People used to
Yeah.
know where their water came from, and people don't know anymore. And so a lot of the work that I do really is around public education and awareness and teaching people why it's important to care about the land and why policy is important and why what, my tribe and other tribes are doing is so important to the long game, to like long-term sustainability. Because like I said, I just believe that everybody has the right to be able to enjoy the natural world, and we should be maintaining it for generations, thousands of years from now, to be able to enjoy it as well.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me think about I love how you brought up the difference between basically how everybody else thinks about the world and the earth and our relationship to it and how extractive it is and how we're not thinking about the people that are going to come after us. And it makes me think about how people talk about climate change now. Mainstream climate conversations are very like numbers based. We've got so many seconds or so many minutes till midnight or all these things are happening. It just seems like everybody has a different opinion or a vague one about what we're doing to the earth. And I want to know what you think changes about conversations about climate change when Indigenous knowledge leads the conversation or when it's centered.
I definitely agree. The conversation, like the mainstream conversation around climate change and even the environmental sector at large,
Mm,
is very technical.
yeah,
And I think it's really a big turnoff to people, and it's either turned into like the numbers game of like, we have so many minutes and we have to
right.
work carbon and this, and there's an
What does that
urgency.
even mean? Yeah,
Yeah. And it's uncomfortable and it's really scary. And people don't want to be uncomfortable. It's just, a natural reaction we have as
right.
people. And the reality is that climate change is very urgent, and it is something that we should be, I think, have like a panic around, but a panic that makes people care and makes them want to mobilize and come together collectively behind action and mission that's going to help, rather than completely turn people away and be like, well, I don't want to think about this because it's scary, so I'm just going to ignore it. And so, the conversation instead, I feel like can be one that makes people feel empowered, that make people feel like they do have actions that they can be a part of and make them feel like they're a part of the solution and the mission of progress and sustainability and, a world in the future that can still sustain our, population and that people can like go outside and be safe and not have to worry about heat strokes or like extreme cooling and,
Mhm.
have access to like healthy, clean water and knowing that the food and the plants that we're eating is good for us too. And so
Yeah.
there's just, I think, a framing that we could better focus on. And, going back to like the indigenous knowledge systems that could be a part of that is the idea that one, we do have power. And empowering people is to educate people. And so, there's this really awesome campaign that they had down here, and it was to teach people why the Everglades was important. And,
Mm.
I mentioned earlier, most people don't really know where their like water comes from anymore. And so they had conducted these surveys and, they asked all these different types of people from around South Florida, do you know where your drinking water comes from? And most people didn't know. Or they would respond with something, kind of common like, well, I just turn on my faucet and I know that I have water because I paid my water bill. But, it was an opportunity for people to learn that more than 80% of our drinking water comes from the Everglades down here.
Wow.
And people don't know what an aquifer is. They really don't know like the function of the Everglades. And so when you can teach people, that the Everglades is like this natural filtration, like body, you know what I mean? The way that we can view the Amazon rainforest as like the lungs of the earth, we can view the Everglades like the kidneys. And I mean, I nerd out over this stuff because I think it's just so freaking cool. But
That's cool. I didn't even know that. That's actually so
yeah.
cool.
And so, the same way I mentioned, it being of kin to us, you can also view it as like a mirror of ourselves or ourselves being a
Mm.
mirror of the world too. Like, all of these large ecosystems serve a purpose that we benefit from. And so when we protect the Amazon rainforest, when we protect the Everglades, when we protect, these bodies of water, these large areas of land or, specific animals and stuff like that benefits us as
Right.
people. I think about, again, that severance of relationship that people have with the land. And I always encourage people, whether they're from Florida and been here their whole life or just moved here or they're just visiting, go out and visit the Everglades because
Mm.
it's really hard to get people to care about something, let alone like advocate for something that they don't know anything about. And we are people, like it is in from the earliest societies that have ever existed, like there were relationships with the land that they were in. You can go out to the glades and you can experience the birds, the animals, the plants, the water, even like getting away from the smells that we're used to by living in the city.
That's facts.
It's,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it makes you feel alive. You can feel a part of it and it makes it that much easier for you to want to care about the Everglades. And so, again, I think it's just like really humanizing the experience of the balance that has always existed in the world, which is, people, plants, water, the air, all of it. And like there's just a beauty in that relationship. It's existed since time immemorial. And I think Indigenous people have not only been masters of the lands that they come from, right? But we've always been very open with like sharing the traditional knowledge systems that our people have developed over literal centuries, where there's like this basis of stewardship that is the very foundation of it is like that kinship, that relationship, the fact that we're just a relative to the land the same way that it's a relative to us. And so there's these really intentional practices of like long-term sustainability, like
Yeah.
agriculture that doesn't directly destroy like the soil composition and things like that. And um, it's really just the example, yeah, like the very example and evidence that there is a way to like live in a harmonious mutualism with the land because we've done it before. So we know
Right.
it's possible.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That makes me think about people also don't understand the significance of our interdependence on each other as well. I think I want to hear you talk about what benefits we get when Indigenous tribes and communities get their land back. Like that is a significant thing for them, but also for us too. Because I don't think people think about that when they think about people getting their land back.
I think that's a good question. It's a good idea to explore and sit with because, I think the idea of climate change, again, it's like very scary and it's
Mm,
intimidating and uncomfortable. But for a lot of Native communities and Indigenous uh, groups, we are like at the forefront of the effects of climate change. They're like not only on the front lines of trying to battle it and like do things to reverse it, but my community. So there's two tribes in Florida. It's the Seminole tribe and the Miccosukee tribe. Ancestrally, this is where people have always been. And we are seeing the direct effects of climate change, so we don't get to
yeah,
ignore it.
yeah.
And I think that more people are starting to realize, non-native people are starting to realize like how right in our face climate change is. There's the like quote that was going around on social media where it's like climate change is going to just turn into like people recording things happening around them and being
Mm-hmm.
like, and people watching the videos and going, oh my God, I can't believe that's happening until like it's happening to literally
Right,
them.
exactly.
And we're seeing floodings, we're seeing natural disasters that are getting more intense,
Yeah,
damage is getting worse, communities are getting displaced. And so, it can seem like this issue that doesn't really affect you until it like quite literally is affecting you.
in your
And
face. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so the interdependence that we have on, the natural world, I think, again, it like goes back to the interdependence that we also have like as people. And it's, I think it can be really hard to maybe be like open to these ideas or these discussions when you're not in spaces where they're talked about, and
Mm-hmm.
in reality, like, I can't tell you how many times I've had these interactions where they're like, wow, you're the first Native person I've ever met. And I'm like, I'm probably not. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You know what I mean? But hey, we're here. Cool.
Yeah.
These ideas of, like ancient knowledge systems and like
Right. Yeah.
relationships to the land, like they're not normal conversations or topics that people have. And so, it's a challenge to yourself to get out of like your silos, out of your echo chambers, and why it's so important to open yourself to new perspectives, new experiences, people from different backgrounds, and that means like socioeconomic backgrounds, like geographically being from different places and whatnot, because that is the only way that we can, that's the only way to have an exchange where we can build solutions that are based on like real experience and, these older knowledge systems that we know to work. And so, I encourage people to like question everything that we've been
Mm.
conditioned to believe, everything from like social norms to cultural norms, like not the way things are right now. It hasn't always been like this, y'all. It has not. Like, we got to look at our country. We're coming up on 250 years, next year that the United States has existed. And it can be a little weird to think about it. But when I give presentations, sometimes I introduce myself in my language and I'm like, my language is older than the United States. The ceremonies that my people practice and partake in, our songs, our dances are older than the United States. And so it is a challenge that people have to take on themselves to reject the conditionings that we've been forced into in our society and be open to different ideas, different perspectives, solutions, even, and just like a different way of things, a different way of doing things.
Yeah, I think so too. Colonialism and capitalism, all that stuff is new. And we're talking about relationships with the land and treating the land as kin. That stuff has always been what people have done. So yeah, I'm really glad you said that. And to your point about, people coming up to you and saying, "Oh, you're the first Native person I've ever met," which is so funny, because you do narrative work around how people see Native and Indigenous communities, and so I'm wondering what kind of stereotypes or myths or misunderstandings you still find yourself up against today, especially around environment and land.
Oh yeah, I joke around and I call this like the 101 presentation because I feel like until you kind of go over these like foundational pieces to narrative, the narratives around Native and Indigenous people, and before you can even really like deep dive into issues, like they just have to understand like us as people. And
Yeah.
so, We are traditional people like navigating a modern world. We are, people that carry, um, you know, knowledge systems again that surpass the existence of the United States. We are a diverse people. This whole idea of like Native American culture really isn't real.
Right.
Today, there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the
Wow.
United States. And by federally recognized, all that refers to really is that they are recognized and acknowledged as sovereign nations in the United States by the federal government. And so
Mm,
that doesn't include state recognized tribes or, tribes that have no recognition at all. And, that it also does not even include like the many, many thousands of tribal communities that existed, before attempted genocide happened. And
yeah.
so you know, the idea of diversity within the Native community, I think, is really hard for people to understand. Down here in South Florida, to be specific, like I mentioned, there's only two tribes, and there probably is very little interaction for like normal day to day people to ever think that they've like met tribal members or tribal citizens. In comparison to somewhere like Oklahoma, where there's so many tribal nations that exist there, and it's a lot more normal, to see like native culture like around you, right? And
Yeah.
so we're a diverse people. And with all of those tribes in existence, like every single tribal community has had a different experience with the government. And I think that's really important to note. Not all of us have like signed peace treaties. Not everybody has different negotiations. There's different relationships with the state and federal level. So understanding like from a government to government perspective, like that operatively can look very, very different for different tribes, different languages, traditional clothings, dances, songs, like traditions, stories even that get passed down. And so just recognizing like we are not just one like big group of people. We are
Mm,
very, very diverse. We look very different. I think we have kind of gotten like pigeonholed into this set of representation that's like very plains focused, so everybody immediately thinks that there's like specific facial features like high cheekbones that we all have or like long dark hair and we're all on horses and wear like war paints and stuff. And I'm like, dude, my people from the Everglades, there was not horses down here until the Spanish brought them.
mm,
And so even I think to get more specific to like skin complexion, there's like this idea that all of us are like just brown. And, no, we all look really different. Like in Florida, probably going to be a little bit darker than the people up north who like don't get sun year round, right? And so it's these little things that feel really silly, but something as small as that can make a really big impact in how our people are
right.
treated. And
Exactly. Yeah.
so we look different, we talk different, we've had different experiences. I always get asked if we like pay taxes, and I'm like, dude, I'll go to prison just like you if I don't pay taxes.
Like,
Like,
what do you think this is?
we have to pay taxes. This idea of free education as well. I'm like, I have student debt like everybody else does. I had to navigate college admissions. I didn't just get in because I'm Native, right? But yeah, it's the like I said, they can feel really silly and it's funny to talk about and like laugh at it. But these are things that have impacted our people in a really, really negative way. And that can hurt us, in our day-to-day experiences of life and, how people interact with us, how we're viewed. And that can be really hurtful. And, there's now research that backs it up where like these stereotypes and misconceptions greatly affect how we view ourselves.
Yeah, of
So
course.
much so, we as Native people have like the highest rate, like Native youth specifically have the highest rates of suicide than any other demographic.
Mm,
And, it's related to the like dehumanization that our people have experienced, getting belittled to mascots, getting belittled to like really racist like cartoons and things like that, even challenging the more dominative narratives through media, specifically like Pocahontas. That entire story is like the Disney movie is a lie. And so this is why I say I encourage people to just question everything, be curious, ask questions. And I try to be very open when I get the opportunity to like educate in those ways because there's questions that people want to ask and they can seem silly or stupid, but uncomfortable conversations lead to understanding. And I think that, we're up against the challenge of like curriculum that isn't always accurate, that isn't always authentic either. And so when I get the opportunity to share, I really take it to heart because education is something that wasn't always granted to our people either. And so I take it all as an opportunity to do right by my people, to share, real history, authentic history, to share our perspective, to share our culture, our history, and our ways, because we're up against, this notion, this vision of our people that has existed for a long time, and that can be tough in itself. But I'm stubborn, just like my ancestors are, so I'm willing to do it.
That's beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you.
Speaking about kind of what you go through as a community, as a collective community, the work that you do carries a lot of grief. You're educating people, which requires talking about history. And I think if you can't talk about the truth of something, especially our history as a country and as a collective people, there's there's no way that will make actual progress. So how do you hold on to hope while witnessing so much loss, while maybe even reliving it by talking about it? How do you keep going?
It can be tough. I admit I am human. I have feelings. I think I carry a lot of what my people have experienced. And, we can talk about the coin terminology of like intergenerational trauma,
Mm,
intergenerational like patterns that get passed on through our people. And that is very real. That is an experience that all communities of color hold in one way or another. And it's important to acknowledge truth, to discuss truth. And the reality is that our country was built on the attempted genocide of one group and the enslavement of another. And that is uncomfortable. You know what I mean? But it's the truth. And if we can't not only acknowledge, but like not have conversations around those things that are embedded deeply into the fabric of our country, we cannot acknowledge these other issues that we're trying to take on, like social
yeah.
issues, environmental issues, like human rights and all of these things. Like we need to acknowledge like the very mindset and ideas that were leading the people that led the creation of this country, because they still exist today. And I've said it like more than a few times, like these things can come off very silly, sure. But when we're talking about, young kids taking their lives because they don't feel like they are valued, respected human beings, that's an issue.
Yeah.
When we're watching communities that have always historically been targeted and marginalized continue to be those things, and, people are losing access to healthcare. They don't have access to food. And we're going through voter suppression and we're seeing them, be economically marginalized too. Like that's a problem.
Mm,
And so is it exhausting in every sense? Absolutely. I am in full recognition of like the literal emotional exertion that comes with having to talk about these things. But I
mhm.
also recognize that this is like a skill that I was given. I feel a responsibility to do to serve out a purpose that I think took me time to discover. And
Yeah.
and when I did, I sat with it and I was like, you know what? This makes me feel good. I appreciate the gifts and the skills that I've been given, and like this is what I believe I'm meant to do. And
Mm,
so, I have my moments where I kind of have to do a mental health check on myself, and it can be very difficult, but I also lean in on my community. I lean in on my family, on my friends. I'm appreciative of the support system that I have that has been a huge part of carrying me through, like these pretty much the last 10 years of like what is now my career. And,
yeah.
I feel really, really lucky to have like discovered this space. And, I, get the opportunity to like literally just get in front of people and talk and share and educate. And like, that's what I get paid to do. And that's beautiful in itself. And, it's taking me all across the country, all across the world. It's connecting me to people like you. And so, there's these tougher days and these tougher moments, but I think nobody grows without a little bit of like uncomfortability and challenge. And,
Yeah.
how we decide to take on challenge and uncomfortability and, what may feel like the wind kind of like pulling us back. Like I think that's when people's true character comes out and you got to step up to the plate, whether it's for yourself, for your community, for a mission that you deeply, deeply believe in. But, I don't think anybody that's ever gotten into advocacy, like woke up one day and was like, I'm going to go like just advocate for this or that. And I'm going to, it's like a calling that you step up to, and it can be difficult. But I have been inspired by a lot of people that I saw growing up, a lot of people even today. And, I think of older people, there's younger people that I take a lot of inspiration from. And there's just a fierceness about these people that are like driven by their passions, driven by their love of community, their love of the land, and they've given their lives to that. And there's the very simple teaching. I think we can see it across like any community or culture, but like this teaching that all of us have a purpose and all of us are
Yeah.
given different skill sets and gifts and abilities to do things. And if you're a storyteller, like go share your stories through films or through pictures or through music. If you're an artist, the same thing. And so I believe that all of us have the ability to contribute towards a better world for everybody, that benefits everybody. And it can be difficult when we're battling like capitalism and like just trying to make ends meet, and we're
Yeah.
just trying to put food on the table and keep a roof over our head. But we we are not powerless people. We are
Right.
not powerless people. Our communities have faced really difficult things. And like by difficult things, I mean like quite literally death. And in those moments where they were facing those things, I believe that they thought about us. They thought about the future that they wanted for us. And when I get to do my presentations or I get to interact with youth, I always tell them that I'm like, I really believe that our ancestors wanted us not only to be here today and like exist and continue our culture and speak our language and all these things, but I really do think they wanted us to just be happy. I think they wanted us to live beautiful lives and to thrive. And, no matter what has come up, our people have figured it out. They've been resourceful, they've been resilient. But, we exist in a world that didn't want us here.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And I don't know, I mean, you can operate from a place of spite or, if that works for you, great. Or you can like lead in this idea of love and that you were loved thousands of years ago and you should carry out that love for the next 1,000 years and future generations that are going to exist.
Well, that's a perfect way for us to close with our what if question, thinking about what previous generations would have wanted for us. So, what if our climate were in harmony with itself? What might life look like? What would we notice in the way people treat each other?
If the climate were to be in harmony with itself again, I think the biggest reflection of that would be how people interact with each other. Because, our communities may not look like what they did thousands of years ago anymore, right? And we're pushed into individualism and this like economic basis of capitalism. But if the climate were in harmony with itself, we would also be in harmony with it, which means that us as people would be in harmony with each other. The biggest mirror of health and well-being is people and the land, right? And there has been generations upon generations of love from our communities that has gotten us to where we are today. And that's still inside of us. Like these knowledge systems, these experiences, all of these things are inside all of us, no matter where we come from. And so the world, if we can be in balance and in a harmonious mutualism, in a reciprocal relationship based on respect, based on kinship, based on mutual benefits, there's a general happiness that could exist. And, these are big questions to think about. And might seem difficult even to envision it, but I carry so much optimism in me. I really do carry so much hope. And might seem confusing for some people. I mean, even for myself, sometimes it can be a little difficult, but I ground myself in the very things that I've shared in our conversation today, which is I know that even thousands of years ago, like there was love then, there was love 250 years ago, and there's same love is going to continue on. and it's in us.
Beautiful and perfect. Thank you, Cheyenne, for sharing your heart with us today. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back for season 2 with new questions and new answers.
Thanks for having me, Daydriane.
This is What If, a podcast by Common Futurists. What If is hosted and produced by me, Daydriane Chapman. Cover art is by Kat Janes. Music is by Sam Barsh and Luna Ray. For more What If content, follow us on Instagram at Common Futurists. The future starts in our imagination and in our inbox. Send your thoughts and dreams to whatif@commonfuture.co.